Hi, today we're going to practice some factoring. This is just going to be review from Algebra 1. In fact, I just pulled in my notes packet from Algebra 1 and we're just going to go through some stuff that we're going to need to be using in geometry here in the next week or two. Alright, so we're going to look at factoring. When factoring is really like dividing, it's the opposite of multiplying, but we're doing it algebraically. So if you think about this problem that I had put in front of you here, and you might have to multiply this, all right? Well, all you're really doing is distributing, and we've done a lot of that. So if we distribute that, then you should end up with a 5x squared, that's what 5x times x would be, plus multiply here, you'd get 20x. All right, now that's easy enough. We've done that. What we're really going to practice is doing the opposite of that, of trying to go backwards, where I give you this and you're trying to turn it into this. In other words, you're trying to find what we call the common factor that both of these numbers would have that you could factor out. All right, so let's look at a few of these. In this example, I actually have three terms. I have a 4x cubed, 8x squared, and a 20. And so let's just start with the number part of that. What number will go into 4, 8, and 20? And the answer is 4. So that's part of my greatest common factor. Then I look at my x's, and I look at this one has 3 x's, this one has 2 x's, but this doesn't have any x. So I could not say any part of the x is a GCF because the 20 doesn't have it. My GCF is the 4. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to factor that out. And since I'm undoing that distributing, I'm undoing the multiply, I divide as I go. So this is just going to end up being an x cubed. 8 divided by 4 is 2, x squared, minus 20 divided by 4 is 5. And you can always check that by redistributing and make sure you get those numbers back. But ultimately, this is what we're shooting for right here. Okay, let's try this next one. Look at the numbers first. What number could you factor out? What goes into both of those? And the answer is 3. 3 goes into both of those. And then how many a's can you factor out? And I know it says a squared, but in my mind I think, okay, I got 2 a's sitting here and I got 1 a sitting here. You can only pull out as much as what each of them would have to give. This one would have 2 to give, but this one only has 1. It only has 1 a. So I could only factor 1 out. It wouldn't make sense to try to factor out 2 because this doesn't have it to give. I'm going to factor out just an a. And now I do my dividing. 18 divided by 3 is 6. It was a squared, but since I factored 1 out, I only have 1 sitting there. Plus 3 divided by 3 is 1. And I had an a, but I factored it out, so there's no a's left. I'm done right there. Okay, see if you can try this next one. Figure out what you could factor out, what is that greatest common factor, and then write in parentheses what's left. Go ahead and pause the video for just a minute while you work through that. All right, here's the answer I got. Go ahead and check yours with mine. I had an a. The number stuff should make sense, but the a's, let's review that real quick. I had an a to the 5th, but since I could factor one of those out, I could only factor out 1 because this one only had 1, so it's the greatest common factor, so they all have to have it to give. So then there were only 4 left. It was an a squared, but since I factored 1 out, there's only 1. And this one that only had 1 no longer has it there because it got factored out. All right, so let's try that with multiplying 2 binomials together. We call that FOIL. And so if you'll remember, you take the first times first, and then you take the outer, and then the inner, and then the last. And let's look and see what we get there. The first would be x times x. Outer would be 4x. Inner is 3x. Last is plus 12. And then oftentimes you had like terms like this, so I'm going to have 7x plus 12. All right, now that's what we've already done, doing the FOIL thing. Now what we're trying to practice is getting from here back to there. So we're going to look and see where all... If you start off, the x squared that you get right here is coming from multiplying the first. So if I have an x squared sitting here, I'm probably going to be pretty sure that when I set up my two parentheses, and this is kind of how I always start, I put those two parentheses there and I say, okay, it's going to have to be x times x. All right. The other thing that we know is that this last number comes from multiplying last, the 3 times the 4. So if I see a 12 here, then I'm thinking, oh, these two numbers are going to have to multiply to get 12. The problem that we have here is that actually 12 has a lot of factors. It could be, yeah, it could be 3 and 4, but it could have been 6 and 2, could have been 1 and 12. How do I know for sure what it's going to be? Well, a couple things that we have to look at. First of all, let's pay attention to the fact that it's a plus 12. The only way that that's going to be a plus 12 is if these were both the same sign. And they were both positives. And so a positive 3 times a positive 4 gets me a positive 12. But it could have also been a negative 3 and a negative 4. That still could have gotten to be a positive. All right. But I think when I look at this, when I see the plus 12, I'm going to look at this number over here, and that's going to tell me, oh, they were both pluses. If this was a minus 7x, then I'd say they were both minuses. Now, so I do think I pretty confidently could say I'm going to have a plus and a plus. And then the question is, and remember, we're pretending that we don't know all of this stuff up here. We're pretending I was given this, and I'm trying to get down to that. And so pretend we don't know this. So how do I know to choose 3 and 4 instead of 6 and 2? Okay, well, the 3 and 4 go right here. That the outer and the inner, that's where the 7 came from. So ultimately, when I sit here and I go through all my options, it could be 1 and 12, it could be 2 and 6, it could be 3 and 4. I'm looking for numbers that are multiplying to 12, but that also will add up to 7. So that's why I know it's not going to be those, and it's going to be the 3 and the 4. And the order you put your 3 and 4 doesn't matter. I see I just switched it from what it was originally. That's okay. All right, so that's where that's going to come from. Now, I kind of went through that kind of long and drawn out, trying to help refresh your memory a little bit. I know that there's a lot of different ways that you can factor, so it kind of depends on who your Algebra 1 teacher was, on which method you used. So I'm not going to do it 4 ways. I'm just going to do it one way and hope you either can pick this up or remember what you did in Algebra 1, whatever. Let's practice this a little bit. Okay, so in this first one, you're always going to start off and you're going to put your parentheses here. And then I have this x squared, so I know it's going to be x and x. Now this time, I'm looking at my last. I need two numbers that are going to multiply and get me a negative 35. Well, the only way to get a negative 35 is to have one of these positive and one of these negative. Okay, I'm going to just start making a list. And since we're just starting this, if you can do this in your head, maybe you're already done and I'm slowing you down. That's great. I hope that's the case. If not, let's go ahead and write some options. It could be a negative 7 and a positive 5, but it could just as likely have been negative 5 and positive 7. Both of those get me to a negative 35. I also could go negative 1 and positive 35, or negative 35 and positive 1. But ultimately, remember, I want them to add up to get me this. So when I look at these options, it's obviously not the 35s. I want to end up with a positive 2x. That's going to have to be these two. That would get me a positive 2x. So to finish this, I'm going to put in a negative 5 and a positive 7. And that's my answer right there. Okay, let's pick up the pace. X and x, factors that multiply to 16, but are going to add up to 10. So I'm thinking 4 and 4, but that's not going to add up to 10. Multiply to 16, how about a 2 and an 8? Yes, that would work, 2 and 8. Now, I know that this means my signs are going to have to be the same, and since this is a plus sign, they're going to both be pluses. So I'm going to have a plus 2 and a plus 8. All right, how about you try the next two on your own? All right, go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with the factors for me. Okay, here I go. I'm going to go ahead and go through it. X and X. A lot of things multiply to 36. Could be 6 and... Oh, it's a negative 36. So it could be a 6, a negative 6 and a positive 6. It could be a negative 9 and a positive 4. Or it could switch. Could be 12 and 3. All kinds of options here. Have you found the one I need yet? I need it to add up to 9. Ooh, I think that one right there did that. Negative 3 and positive 12. That adds up to 9. So minus 3 plus 12. Oops, forgot my one there. All right, last one. X and X. Things that multiply to 9 add up to 10. Okay, I don't think it's going to be 3 and 3. I think it's going to be 9 and 1. But what's different, notice this time, I know that my numbers are going to have to be, or my numbers are going to have the same sign, so 9 and 1, except those add up to a positive 10, and I need it to be a negative 10. So instead of having a 9 and a 1, I'm going to have a negative 9 and a negative 1. That multiplies to positive 9, but will get me the negative 10 I need. All right, I'm kind of showing all these factors over here. Ultimately, our goal is that you don't need to list those out, that you can kind of do some of that stuff in your head. Okay, this says practice working on odds on the front page of the worksheet. You can go practice on your homework if you want to. I'm not positive. I don't have it in front of me, so this might have been from Algebra 1, so maybe that doesn't even affect you. I don't know. Let's keep going. All right, so we're going to spend some time now doing some, and so like I said, maybe you want to take a break and go practice that a few times. Do some trinomials that look like that one. Because now I'm going to start something new. I'm going to factor some special things. Like this is called a difference of squares. This actually happens quite a lot. A difference, meaning we're going to be subtracting. Squares means you're going to be looking at perfect squares. And if you'll remember from doing radicals, the perfect squares are like 4, 9, 16, 25. So those are going to be the kind of numbers that I see. To factor this, what's really going on is it's this, x squared plus 0x minus 64. Now I'm not going to rewrite that every time, but look at what would happen if I tried to factor that. It'd be x and x, factors of a negative 64 that get me 0. Well, that'd have to be a positive 8 and a negative 8. And that's how that's going to play out every time. Every time, if this is a difference subtraction, and these are both perfect squares, it's going to factor to where you ultimately are just square rooting this, you have 1 plus and you have 1 minus. So let's try this one. That's going to be x plus 10 and x minus 10. There we go. All right. It can get fancier. Now I've put more than just an x in the front. Now it's a 4x squared. But remember, I'm just square rooting everything. So it's going to turn into 2x and another 2x. And then I'll have a 5. And remember, one's a plus and one's a minus. Okay, last one. Square root the 16x squared. Square root the 1. Whoa, that was messy. All right, that's a difference of squares. Pretty easy once you get used to it. Okay. Now this right here is ultimately why we're reviewing this. You learn kind of all the algebra stuff in Algebra 1, but then you have to start applying it in things that you do in geometry. And we're going to have some quadratics come up where we have to solve. And we did this like one day a month ago or so, where we had to practice the solving. And I kind of did a quickie review of it. Let's spend a little bit more time so you for sure have it. What's different now is that I'm giving you the same trinomial, but now it equals 0. And it has to equal 0. If it doesn't equal 0, then you move everything over to the same side until you have 0 on this side. All right. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this. It's going to be x and x, multiplies to 21, has to add up to 10. That's a 7 and a 3. But it equals 0. And from Algebra 1, if you'll recall, that if you're multiplying these two quantities together, you're taking x plus 7 and you're multiplying by x plus 3. And if you're going to multiply two things together and say it equals 0, the only way that works is if this is 0 or this is 0. So after we have it factored, we set each one of those equal to 0. And say, okay, these would be the options. Either x plus 7 is 0, which means x is going to equal negative 7, or x is going to equal negative 3. I have two answers on this, negative 7 or negative 3. Either one of those numbers, if I were to plug it back in up here, would make this trinomial equal 0. Now I am going to throw this out here. We are just doing algebra today, but when we start doing stuff in geometry, we always have to be a little bit wary of negative answers. In algebra, it didn't really mean anything. We were just doing the algebra, doing the math. But in geometry, oftentimes x represents the side of a parallelogram or something, and we couldn't have a side length be negative. So we will have to be wary of negatives when we start doing this in geometry. Today we're just going to do the algebra, so don't worry about it. Next problem. Going to factor it. X and x. Multiplies to 10, adds up to a negative 11. It's going to be 10 and 1. But it actually needs to be a negative 10 and a negative 1. Remember, this means the signs are the same. They're both going to be whatever that is. All right, now I set those each equal to 0. And I'm just going to do the mental math. You don't have to show that. I'm going to add the 1. And usually this is kind of how we write it. We write x equals 1, comma, and we just start listing out what x can equal. It can equal 1 or it can equal 10. Those are my two answers. All right, again, x and x. Multiplies to negative 30. So I'll have one positive and one negative. Negative 30 and adds up to a positive 7. Okay, I might have to come over here on the side and start listing some. Let's see, 2 and 15 multiplies. One of those would have to be negative. That's not going to get me a 7. How about a 5 and a 6? That multiplies. One of them have to be negative. Doesn't work. 3, this is the one, 3 and 10. 3 and 10. Now think about it, I want it to be a positive 7, so I'd want my 3 to be negative. There's my positive 7. Okay, got it. So then I'm going to finish it out. Minus 3 plus 10. Set those each equal to 0. X would be 3 or negative 10. Right, next one. Actually, why don't you pause the video? Why don't you try one on your own? I can't do all the work. You try one. Go ahead and pause it. All right, I ended up with 12 and negative 2 on that one. Okay, so then we're going to solve special quadratic equations. So going back to the difference of squares, but now we're solving. So going back, x squared minus 25, that's an x plus 5, x minus 5. Okay, and maybe now that we've done this enough times, have you caught on that if this says plus 5, the answer is going to end up negative 5 because you're going to have to move it to the other side? And if this says minus 5, it's going to actually end up a positive 5 for your answer. So I might start bypassing this step here. If you feel comfortable, you can just say, okay, x plus 5 is going to get me a negative 5, and this will be a positive 5. If you can kind of do that solving in your head. If not, just write it out. All right, square rooting, 2x and 2x, 9 and 9, one's a plus, one's a minus. Okay, I totally lied. Last time we could do that in our head. This time let's look at, this is a little weirder because you get that 2 sitting there. Let's try. 2x plus 9 equals 0. All right. I am going to subtract the 9, But then I have 2x equals negative 9. So I have to divide by 2. So my x equals, this is going to be super messy, did not anticipate this. X is going to equal a negative 9/2. And then I do it again. 2x minus 9 equals 0, doing the second one here. Add the 9, divide by the 2. So I'd also have a positive 9/2. Got a negative 9/2, positive 9/2. Okay, now those were difference of squares. The other kind of factoring we did was GCF. So let's try a couple GCF solving. I'm going to factor out my GCF. Looks like it's just an x. And then I'm going to have x minus 7 left. And I'm still multiplying here. So I'm still going to set x equal to 0 and x minus 7 equal to 0. The x minus 0 is just one of my answers. So I'm going to have a 0 and then add the 7. 0 and 7. So even though it's just a what we call a monomial that you're factoring out, it's not a binomial, you'll still set it equal to 0. It's just going to end up giving you 0. Okay, let's try one more of these. This last one, I'm going to factor out a 5x, and then I would have an x plus 8. Now when I set those equal to 0, even if I divide by 5, x is still 0. And over here, you have your standard subtract the 8. So I get 0 and negative 8 for my answers there. Okay, again, this says finish the entire worksheet. I'm pretty sure that was from Algebra 1 because I'm not done yet. Remember, just review, so I'm kind of flying. All right, last type of factoring. And this is a little bit trickier type of factoring because my firsts are going to be a little bit different now. If you multiply the first here, you get 2x squared. And then do outer and inner, and then last. So I have 2x squared plus 11x plus 12. And ultimately, our goal is to be given this and be able to get back to this. Now, what's different is this 2 that's suddenly here. And that 2, when I did my outer right here, that 2 messed with my 4 that I had. It all of a sudden made it an 8. So it's not as simple anymore of factors of 12 that add up to 11, because that's not 8 and 3 aren't factors of 12. I'm going to have to realize that that 8 had to get multiplied by the 4 got multiplied by the 2, and that's where the 8 came from. So this 2 that I have, this leading coefficient, is going to kind of mess with it. So ultimately, let me show you, thinking backwards through this, here's what I would do. I'd say, all right, first has to get me 2x squared. Well, I know I have to multiply to get 2, so it's going to have to be a 2x and a 1x. That's how I'd get 2x squared. And then I'm sitting here thinking of, and I like to kind of do this with guess and check, and it helps with your mental math skills, and if you're already good at mental math, it goes pretty easily, and if you're not, it's a good practice. So let me throw some numbers in there. Let me start with like a 2 and a 6. That multiplies to 12. And then what I'm doing, and I'm showing all this work, you eventually start doing this in your head, but I've got a 4 and a 6 for outer and inner. 4 and 6 will not get me an 11, so I know that that's not right. So what I do is I erase, and I try to swap that, because maybe it was the 6 that was supposed to be multiplied by the 2, not the 2. So now I have 12 and 2. Well, that also does not get me 11, so that's still not right, which means 6 and 2 are not right. I picked the wrong factors. Let's pick something else. Let's pick 3 and 4. Okay, so I'm going to put in 3 and 4, and then I check my outer and my inner. 4x and 6x. That would get me a 10x. not an 11x. So I swap them. Maybe I'm just multiplying the wrong thing. I'm going to put the 4 over here and the 3 here. Now I have an 8x and I have a 3x. There's my 11x. I finally got that 11x I was shooting for. And then let's throw in our signs. We know that they're the same and they're both pluses, and we've got our factors, which match. Okay. Now I did that pretending I didn't know what the answer was, and that's kind of how you got to work through these. All right, now we're going to try something here where we're just going to practice these, and I'm going to do some and then you're going to do some. So starting off, I'm going to put my parentheses in here, and I know that my firsts have to multiply to get 2x squared. So what multiplies to 2? Well, it's going to have to be a 2x and a 1x. And then I'm going to look for factors of negative 10, multiply to negative 10, so that could be like a negative 2 and a 5, or maybe a negative 5 and a 2. Could be a negative 1 and 10, or it could be a negative 10 and 1. Those are all my options. Now, I usually don't get too worked up about all the negative stuff. I'll adjust my signs later instead of listing all this out. But what I have to remember is I'm no longer looking for these to add up to 19, because I got the 2 over here that's going to get multiplied on the outer and then combined with the inner. So this 2 on the outer is going to mess with my numbers. Now think about this for a second. This is where it kind of gets good in your mental math. You have to have opposite signs because of the negative right here. You'll have one positive and one negative. And then with a one positive number and a negative number, you still need them to add up clear to a negative 19. That's huge. So I'm going to have to take this 2 times something to build it up. So I'm guessing that my 10 is going to go there. And I'm going to have a 20 then. And then when I put in 1 there, I'm going to have a 1. And remember, one of these is positive and one is negative. That's going to get me my 19. I'm going to want my 20 to end up negative. So for that to happen, the 10 here would be negative, negative 20. And then the 1 would be positive. That'd get me a positive 1. And there's my negative 19. So this right here is my answer, those factors. Okay, let's try again. Factors of 3x squared. Well, that's going to have to be 3x and 1x. We don't have to write that 1, but now I like this one because it's better. It doesn't have options. 7. It's going to have to be 7 and 1. It's the only thing that multiplies to 7. But the trick is, which one of those do you want to multiply by the 3? Look at what you're trying to get to. Yeah, I think we're going to want to take our 7 there. That's going to get us a 21x, and then 7 times 1. There's my 1x. One of those is going to have to be negative because of the negative here. So I think I want 21 to be negative and 1 to be positive. So to make that happen, I would put a minus there and a plus there. Okay, let's try again. Oh, looks like I got a 3x squared again. So that's a 3x and an x. This time I have a plus 20. That's kind of easier, I guess. A plus 20 means my signs will be the same. They're going to both be minuses. If I wanted to go ahead and throw in the minuses, I could do that. Now the trick, though, with 20 is I have some options. It might be the 4 and the 5, or it might be the 2 and the 10, or it might be a 1 and a 20. I got options there. And I've got to figure out, not only is it those, but I got to figure out which one of those numbers would I multiply by the 3 to get to it. So I'm trying to get to a negative 17. I'm going to guess that it's 4 and 5 maybe. Can you look at it and figure out where you'd want to put your 4 and 5? If I put the 5 there and the 4 there, that'd be a 15 and a 4 negatives. That's negative 19. That's not what I want. So I undo all that. And I'm going to put my 4 here and my 5 here. Now I end up with a negative 12x. and a negative 5x, that's negative 17x. Okay, I kind of purposely did that wrong just to show you that's how it works. You try something, then swap it. If it doesn't work, then you ditch the 4 and 5 and you would have gone to 2 and 10 and tried to see if that worked. If you can do it in your head, you start saving yourself a lot of eraser. Oh, whoops, I was supposed to make you do this one by yourself. Okay, so got ahead of myself. Go ahead, I got you started. There's a 2 there. Pause the video. You have to finish this one on your own. All right, here's what I ended up with. I used the 2 and 3, factors of 6, 2 and 3. Signs are the same. They're both minuses. And there's a negative 4x and a negative 3x. That's how I got to my 7x. So this right here would have been the answer. Now, if you had that swapped, if you ever swapped the 2 parenthesis sets, that's okay. That doesn't matter. All right, which takes us to this. This is our last one. And it's doing that, but now it equals something, so we have to solve it once we finally figure out the factors. All right, so I'll try one and then you try one. This is going to be 3x and x. It's a negative 15, so I'm going to have a negative and a positive for my signs. I don't like to slip them in there too quick if they're different, because I don't know with this 3 there, I'm not sure how that's going to affect it. I'd probably guess that it's going to be 5 and 3 for my factors versus a 1 and 15, but it's a matter of getting them in the right place that will get you a 4x. Remembering that your signs are going to be different. One's a plus and one's a negative. So you're going to have to build it up and then kind of bring it back down with the negative. So I'm going to try putting my 3 there and my 5 there. I'm going to build it up to a 9 and then subtract out the 5. That's how that's going to work. So the 5 will be negative, the 9 there would be positive. All right, now that's the factoring. Now I set each one of those, 3x minus 5 equals 0, and x plus 3 equals 0. This one I'm going to have to add the 5 and then divide by 3. So x equals 5 thirds. So 5 thirds and negative 3. All right, you pause the video, see if you can do the next one on your own. All right, here are my 2 answers. I got a negative 1 and a negative 7 halves. Hopefully you agree with mine. If not, take a peek at my work. All right, and then that's the end. So at this point then, you should be able to do your factoring homework. All right, hope this helps. Good luck.